Hello and welcome again. My name is Patrick McCary, and I would like to take a little bit of time today to deal with the idea of church facility accessibility. On my last video, I dealt with the need or why churches need to be accessible. Today I want to deal with the fact that many of us have made efforts who work with churches, whether it's the leadership in the church, the eldership in the church, whether it's a group of men. We've made efforts in our facilities a lot of times to accommodate members who have differing disabilities. But I would like to take some time this morning to just go over some of the easy things that as a member of a church I can do to help accommodate somebody who has a disability, somebody who's a wheelchair user, someone who has difficulty climbing stairs, someone maybe who is hard of hearing. There's some very simple things that we can do as people who attend church, as members of churches. There's some very simple things we can do. I think the first thing we can do is make sure our facilities are easy to enter and exit. Those of us who have older facilities, I've worked with some churches with buildings in excess of 80, 90 years old. And those of us with those type buildings, oftentimes they're built with stairs to enter and exit. Oftentimes 20, 30, 40 inches in height above the ground level. And to enter one of these buildings is going to require some thinking on our part. And for somewhat, many of us have done that. We've built access ramps, but I want us to kind of look at what it takes to get somebody who is not able to climb stairs into a building. The Americans with Disabilities Act recommends that an access ramp be 1 inch of rise for every 12 inches of run. So if a doorway is 30 inches above the ground level, it needs to be 30 foot long. Or if it's 24 inches above ground level, 24 foot long. Most of us have built ramps and we didn't take those things into consideration. Maybe many of us probably didn't even realize the need for a ramp to be as long as it is. We didn't understand why it needed to have such little slope. But as a person who has used a wheelchair, those things become evident. The more steep a ramp is, the more difficult it is for a wheelchair user, especially a wheelchair user who is propelling themselves to enter a building. And so the Americans with Disabilities Act it came along in 1990, and it says a ramp needs to really be only 1 inch of rise for every 12 inches of run. And so if I was in a building with a doorway height 24 inches above ground, I would need a 24-foot ramp. On national average, that ramp would cost me around $1,450 to probably $1,600 to have built. You know, in reality, that's not that expensive of an upgrade for most churches. $1,400 to $1,600 so that members of the church can have access into a building. It's not horribly too expensive. Especially when we realize the fact if we don't have that access, many of those members, some who are older, some who are younger, but many of them would simply either stay home or they would go somewhere else. Another area that needs to be addressed, especially in older buildings, built probably, and sadly enough, really before 1990, buildings built before 1990, we need to address doorways for bathrooms. Now, I know before 1990, the doorways on bathrooms, the code had required them to be 32 inches, and that changed early before the 90s. But after 1990, after the ADA Act, It said commercial restroom doorways needed to be 36 inches. That's a nice wide doorway. Now, I know some of you who work with older buildings, say built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that's not the case. Those doorways are some as narrow as 24 inches or 2 foot. And the reality is there's no way someone who uses a wheelchair can go through one of those doors. Actually, somebody who is having other mobility issues, somebody who's using a walker, especially like one of the rolling walkers called a rollator, the difficulty for them to even enter that doorway is unreal. And so we need to look at widening doorways, especially to the restrooms, to classrooms. I worked with one congregation. The building was built in the early 70s. And the bathrooms had 24-inch doorways. The classrooms had 28-inch doorways. And to be honest with you, the access into the bathrooms or the classroom for somebody who was in a wheelchair, who used a wheelchair, was almost impossible. Even though this building was built on a concrete slab and it was really easy to access as far as getting from the sidewalk into the building, you still couldn't get into the restrooms. You couldn't get into classrooms. They had made some modifications so the fellowship area was in, you could enter it. But there's some difficulties there as well that we need to consider. I know many of us have done our best. We've tried to upgrade buildings. But we also need to consider why. Why does a doorway need to be so wide? Well, let's take this for example. An average wheelchair seat is 18 inches. Now, on average, that 18-inch, you can just simply figure in another 10 inches in width for wheel spacing and wheel width, which bumps that up to about 24 to 26 inches in width. Now that's on an average wheelchair. So the average wheelchair would be 24, 26 inches wide. That's for somebody who's pretty physically fit. And for a wheelchair user to go through a 28-inch doorway with a, say, a 24-inch wide wheelchair, it's doable. Most users at that level can do it. However, for an older person who is using a wheelchair due to arthritis or muscle issues just due to age and aging of their bodies, they don't have quite the hand control. They're not quite as nimble as a younger person who is a wheelchair user, and so that 28-inch doorway even becomes a difficulty for them. Now let's step that up, because the reality is, they said the average wheelchair is an 18-inch seat, but many wheelchair users use a 19 or 20-inch seat. It pushes the wheelchair about 28 to 29 inches wide. This is why the rules have come along and said the bathroom doorway needs to be 32 inches in homes, newer homes that are being built, modular homes. That's why they will state that. But this is also why the ADA has said commercial buildings need to have 36-inch doorways. We need to make sure anybody using a manual wheelchair can enter into a bathroom or classroom easily. Now we come along to electric wheelchairs. Electric wheelchairs are oftentimes much wider than the manual ones. They actually, a lot of times, are 30 to 34 inches in overall width, where you honestly need that true 36-inch doorway to even get the wheelchair through. And this is kind of why ADA has said 36-inch doorways. So as church people, as people who attend church as Christians, we look at these realities, and when we realize that there will be people in our congregation who either use canes or they'll use walkers or they'll use wheelchairs, we need to take those things into consideration when we're building ramps. We need to make sure the ramps have a gentle enough slope that they're able to go up them without an issue. We need to make sure that people who use wheelchairs can enter into classrooms and bathrooms easily. Another consideration that most of us don't think about are the door handles, the doorknobs themselves. Oftentimes we like that round doorknob. That's just that classical doorknob for us. But the reality is, for people with arthritis, for people with spinal cord injuries, muscular dystrophy, the list goes on, that doorknob is hard to grasp. It's just hard to get a hold of and turn for their hands. And so ADA has come along and said, there's an easier door lever, and it's a lever door lever, and they're not that expensive to change out. And I know many buildings, even built into the 90s, would use round doorknobs. And one of the easiest modifications we can make is to go and buy a cheap, if we don't need them, the lock set as cheap as $12, but probably on average $20, $25 a piece, door set with a lever instead of a doorknob. That way anybody can take their hand and open it easily. Entering into the bathrooms are big. That's a big thing. And so there's some easy things to look at in there for the church buildings that aren't accessible. Can we modify a bathroom to be accessible? The answer is most of the times yes. Just to help you along, the average cost of a complete gut renovation of a bathroom is about $60 a square foot, or right at $8,000 to $9,000 for a 150 square foot bathroom. That's a nice sized bathroom. That bathroom is large enough to easily be renovated. And when I say renovated, I mean that's a gut renovation. That's new flooring, that's new tile, that's new sinks, commodes, that's the whole gamut. That's mirrors, that's everything. That's new lighting in the bathroom. Oftentimes though, we don't need to hire the contractor. We've got members who can do that work. Oftentimes our bathroom doesn't need a complete gut job. It needs a few modifications. It may need a new style sink base. That will cost us maybe up to $300 or $400. It needs a new commode. That will cost us up to $250. It may need grab bars on the wall in appropriate places. Those will cost us $150 or so. And the reality is, a bathroom can probably be done as little as $1,500 to $2,000 if we have members who can do that. However, there is something we need to remember when we do bathrooms. We need to make sure that someone who uses a wheelchair can roll into the bathroom, and they can roll up to the toilet and transfer from the wheelchair to the toilet fairly easily. And that's a consideration we need to take in. Oftentimes we'll like, oh yeah, our bathroom is accessible because we've got a handrail and our doors have been widened. And that is a great help. It's a great help to a person like myself, where I have some disabilities, some issues standing up from normal seat height, and that grab bar, that taller toilet, it's a lot easier for me to get up with. That's a great help for people like me. It's a great help for older individuals. But however, if we have a wheelchair user there, we need to take in consideration, what does it take for them to go from the wheelchair to the commode, or from the wheelchair to get to the sink, and for them to be able to reach the sink. Changing out the faucets so the faucets are lever style faucets so that they can reach and wash their hands properly. Those are some things that we need to consider. Overall, the cost of doing the renovation varies. I would suggest, or I would say, I think most churches with men who are capable, if code allows, can do modifications for anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000. However, in larger cities or in places where code doesn't allow, we need to hire in a contractor. Maybe our facilities insurance requires that, the workman's comp requires us hiring in a professional. And that can go up to $9,000. But again, a $9,000 bathroom on a 150 square foot bathroom is a complete renovation. I mean, that's new flooring and everything. The reality is, in older buildings, we can get by with one, what we call unisex bathroom. However, it is nice. It is good to have both a men's and women's that is accessible. And if our facility is large enough and it allows, and our finances allow it, I think that's something we ought to consider. I understand smaller churches do not have the finances. I understand that smaller churches, a $2,000, $3,000 ramp is a stretch for their budget. They don't have that money. And it may take 3 to 6 months of fundraising or of pledges in the church or donations by members to reach that amount. Again, I also understand that with the bathrooms. Yet those are just simple things we can start looking at. Other things, though, in the building that we need to consider are seating in the auditorium. Again, if we have some really handy members, some good handymen who are members, they can modify pews and shorten pews up so that you can have places where wheelchairs can park in the auditorium, so that somebody who is using a wheelchair isn't left at the back of the auditorium, kind of hidden in a corner. That's just not really a cool thing to happen. For people with disabilities, they want to be part of society. They want to intermingle with everybody. And so our idea is, what does it take? What does it take for us to create a facility that is accessible? Sometimes it may mean modifying the pews. Sometimes it may mean that on the sound system for people who have hearing difficulties. There's what they call a closed loop system for the sound system that actually plugs in to the amplifier, and it's a wireless receiver, either an earbud or earphones for a person who is hearing difficulties, to be able to listen to the sermon adequately. And those are some considerations as well. Other considerations for churches are things being visible for older members and those members who have vision problems. We need to take in consideration our PowerPoints, our PowerPoint presentation. Ministers, I'm talking to you now. When we make a presentation with PowerPoint, audiovisual experts will tell us our font size on our work needs to be at least 28, if not 32 point font. And for headings and things such as that, it needs to be 44 font. Now, I know that seems awful big to some of you. As a matter of fact, for those who love to put large amounts of writing, you won't be able to do that. But there's a reason the audiovisual experts will say it needs to be 28 to 32 point writing. What they're doing is they're considering that you have sized your projection system for the auditorium you're using. And they're saying a person with 20/20 vision sitting in the furthest corner of the building should be able to read the furthest corner of the auditorium, the back row basically, should be able to read the PowerPoint display. And for a person with 20/20 vision, normal vision, in normal lighting conditions, to read a PowerPoint display, it needs to be 28 point from the furthest point in the room. What that didn't consider, and that doesn't take into consideration, are people like me. My vision's about 20/60, and so for me to read PowerPoint from the back of the room, almost anywhere is not possible. I like sitting about the midway in the auditorium. If someone's done PowerPoint at 28 to 32 point, midway in the auditorium, it works for me. However, if we are trying to cram in a lot of information into a slide, what we're doing is we're only allowing people who are sitting closer, who see well, who have normal or perfect vision, we're only allowing them to see and read the slides that we're producing. So when we start talking about accessibility in buildings, I understand many of us have made great strides to make sure our buildings are accessible. But I also think we need to take a new look at our facilities and our plans. I know many of our buildings are old, and they present unique and difficult challenges at times. However, many of those challenges are not quite as costly as we would fear. On average, for an older facility to come up to ADA standards, a church may spend as much as $20,000 modifying doorways, entryways, and bathrooms, hiring a contractor to do these things. However, they may spend as little as $1,500 or $2,000 modifying. It really is more or less a case-by-case situation. And also, for those who are in older buildings, it's not something that has to all be done at once. You know, one of the things that excites me as a person who has differing disabilities, it excites me just to see people trying and people caring, making those good faith gestures. And I'm going to tell you that goes a long way in the community as well. When we as Christians make those good faith gestures to say, hey, we want to be accessible, it goes a long way. For those of us who are in newer facilities, as I am now, I think we also need to take a long, hard look at our facilities. You know, I'm in a facility now that was built around 2000, and one of the disappointing things I've noticed are sidewalks actually aren't to width that they're supposed to be. Getting in the building, if you were a wheelchair user, is quite difficult still because our parking lot's gravel. Now, I know that where we're at, finances to put in a paved parking is not right now in our budget, but I think that's something over time we can look at. And I think that's for all of us. You know, we need to be considering our entire facility. We need to consider we have an aging membership for a lot of us. Some of us, we're looking at a town that's an aging community. Remember, as the baby boomers age, more and more of these needs are going to arise. With studies saying some 40% of all members of the church have varying disabilities, it makes a strong case for us to make sure our building is accessible. Again, my name is Patrick McCary. I have a business called Access for All. I do consulting with churches on accessibility. I also do seminars. You can get in touch with me at packey3@juno.com. That's PACKEY 3@juno.com. You can also just like this on Facebook or leave me a message on YouTube saying, hey, I would like to talk further with you. Maybe we want a facility audit. I offer that. Also offer, if you want to email me, I can offer you a checklist of differing things for your church to do their own audit. And so feel free to contact me. Thank you.